Today's World Insight. A new U.S. legislation raising the bar on the audit of U.S.-listed foreign companies, sending jitters over the impact on listed Chinese firms. Are they the target?
More and more Chinese companies, instead of choose to get listed in the U.S., they will come back to Hong Kong or maybe even to the Asia market to get listed.
And up close with Emmanuelle Charpentier, the 2020 Nobel Laureate in chemistry, credited for laying the foundation of groundbreaking gene editing. Her thoughts on COVID-19 and breaking the glass ceiling as a top female scientist.
I think a wake-up call with regard to really the urgent need to continue to do research in infectious diseases.
Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Gathering headwinds for Chinese companies listed on American stock markets. On Wednesday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill called the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. The bill requires companies to give U.S. regulators more access to their audit information. Failure to comply would mean removal from U.S. exchanges after 3 years. The measures likely target Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying said on Thursday, quote, "What the U.S. is doing is no other than another concrete example of its political suppression of Chinese companies in a bid to contain China's development," end of quote. Adding, quote, "The Chinese side will certainly take necessary measures to safeguard its legitimate and lawful rights and interests." So, what does this piece of U.S. legislation mean for publicly listed companies, the financial markets, and China-U.S. ties? Let's loop in our panelists. For more on the U.S. HFC Accountable Act, we are joined in New York City. Anthony Chen, former J.P. Morgan Chase chief economist. In Guangzhou, Hong Hao, managing director and head of research at Bocom International. In Beijing, Zhao Hai, assistant research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Mr. Chen, want to start with you. Been working so long in the Wall Street. Tell me more about the nature of this act as you see it.
Well, I think that it's certainly something that the United States has been contemplating for quite some time. What they really want on a bipartisan fashion is to be able to get the same information out of Chinese companies that they get out of U.S. companies to sort of provide that information for investors. I realize that we are in a politically tense moment, and certainly these kinds of things appear to be troublesome. But my hope and expectation is that over time, both countries can come to some sort of a compromise to provide more information, but at the same time maintain the sovereignty of both countries.
So, Mr. Hong, will Chinese companies comply?
The Chinese companies listed in the U.S. are probably in a bit of bind here, in the sense that, if they want to continue to be listed in the U.S., they have to comply with the U.S. law. But then, because they are Chinese companies, they also have to comply with the Chinese law as well. It's very similar to the TikTok situation where, the U.S. government, Trump, ordered them to sell to Oracle. But then I think, the Chinese has a technology exporting technology law, to forbid sensitive technology to be, sold to foreign entities. So I think, it's a tricky situation. But I think, for Chinese companies, many of them, especially the leading ones, have been preparing for contingencies such as this. So I don't think, too many people were caught by surprise. For example, early this year, back in April, this legislation has passed the Republican Senate. So now, it's the House that is passing it. It's reaching to the desk of Trump. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, more and more Chinese companies, instead of choose to get listed in the U.S., they will come back to Hong Kong or maybe even to the Asia market to get listed.
Right. But on the other hand, how should we see the nature of this act at this critical moment, Mr. Hong, from the Chinese perspective? And now we all know this is already, pretty much we know who is going to be in the White House by January the 20th. And also we know that there are issues that the current administration might not necessarily agree with the incoming presidency. And yet, at the end of the term, the current administration put out something like this. Is this setting the stage for the incoming administration in terms of how they will have to deal with China? Or this is quite an interesting development that seems to be bipartisan, including setting a good foundation, quote unquote, for negotiation for the incoming administration? Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think, the rivalry between the two countries, is on course, because, the status of the Chinese economic cloud is challenging, the status quo of the U.S. So I'm not surprised to see, even, you change the president, but then the rivalry continues as time rolls on. I think that is the reason why, this legislature is getting bipartisan approval and rather quickly. And also, if you look at in the past 10 years how some of the Chinese companies use reverse backdoor listing to get listed in the U.S., and some of them actually, were exposed to have some accounting fraud, and as recent as the coffee company that got into trouble. So I'm not surprised to see, the U.S. legislators want to tighten the rules.
Right.
But then at the same time, in a bigger context, I would say that the rivalry between U.S. and China will continue.
Mr. Zhao, from your perspective, what could be some of the contingency plans for Chinese companies who are trying their best to hold on to the listing in the U.S.?
Well, right now, the Chinese companies are using public accounting firms to audit those firms and reporting to the U.S. And the only thing after this legislation that they can do is to prepare for the possibility that they will get delisted. So I think these companies should consider going back to Asia, the market in Hong Kong or somewhere else. And a lot of big market cap companies have already done so.
Mm-hmm.
Other smaller cap companies might considering other options, including privatization. However, that could lead to some detrimental outcome for American investors. So this law, I think, without previous consultation with China and without a more thorough consideration of just protecting American investors on the one hand, however, not considering the possibility of the downside is probably not a very good outcome for both sides.
Whose biggest loss is it, Mr. Chan?
I think at this point, the biggest loss is for the entire global economy, because when the two largest economies are in conflict, I think that certainly all the countries around the world and all financial markets suffer. But right now, in terms of investors, they do have an opportunity, because with the Hong Kong Connect situation, where companies that are listed in Hong Kong, they can trade from Shanghai and in Shenzhen, and then of course foreign investors can access those companies. So there is a backdoor for the U.S. investor to still access these Chinese companies. But I think that anytime you have these kinds of conflict, it is a problem for global financial markets. And I would hope that both countries can sit down and at least find some sort of a middle ground.
Mr. Hong, what do you think could be some of the contingency plans?
I think, the Chinese companies listed in the U.S. are the better ones. To be honest, you see Baidu, Alibaba, and all that, they're all listed in the U.S. These are, some of the more sort of leading companies in the Chinese economy. And the reason why they chose to list in the U.S. was because back then, the listing in China is done on an approval basis rather than on registration base. And so now we have a listing reform in China.
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot easier, for the leading companies to get listed in the U.S. So I think it's a big change. So, at the same time, while, the U.S. is somehow showing some hostility towards Chinese companies listed in the U.S. based on maybe ideologically a difference, but then at the same time, the Chinese market is undergoing a substantial reform. So, referring to your question earlier on, who would be a bigger loser? I would say that, the U.S. investors would have a lot more to lose. And I think, for companies who have fraudulent accounting practice, I would say it's a prevalent phenomenon. It's not specific to a certain group of companies trading in the U.S. Right? So, even local U.S. companies, some of them were found, were engaged in accounting fraud as well. So it is a complicated situation, and I think both sides have lots to lose. But then I think the U.S. investors would have lose the opportunities to invest in the best of the breed Chinese companies.
Does the latest move, the latest act, give the president-elect and the new administration more bargaining chips, Mr. Hong?
Yes and no. I would say that this legislature has been sort of in motion for a long time now. I think most people in the market are not surprised.
Yeah.
And I think even with Biden coming in, he probably would try to have a more negotiation-based approach to solve the problem rather than a unilateral approach to solve the problem. And that, because the rivalry is on, I think in many fields, in technology, in finance, in many other fields. So, it could be used as a bargaining chip. It's hard to say right now.
It's hard to say at this moment, but if you look at the overall picture, we talk particularly of some of the tech-related companies, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. The fate of these companies are actually quite interesting these days, together with their counterparts in the U.S. as well. On the one hand, they have already become the pillar of the new economy in both countries and beyond. On the other hand, they have also becoming the target of anti-monopoly legislations and also discussions back in their own economies, and certainly probably in foreign markets as well. So how should we understand, this layer of discussion added to the earlier part about the anti-monopoly and their common fate? Mr. Chen, your take?
My take is that if you look at history in the United States or even globally, you'll find that when a industry is in its early days, you generally see that they can grow in almost an uncontrolled fashion. But over time, as any industry starts to mature, and you get that monopoly power, you usually get that result. In the United States, of course, we saw that with oil companies about 100 years ago. During my lifetime, we saw it with Microsoft. We saw it with some of the telephone companies. And now, of course, we're starting to see it with the technology companies. So, it's not a big surprise when you see companies or industries becoming more concentrated. Eventually, we will see the regulators coming out. It is a bit surprising that that is happening in China. But again, if you look at long-term history and countries all around the world, it should not really be a surprise.
Mr. Hong?
Yeah, I actually agree with Anthony. I think it's not a surprise at all. I think this market, within China, these companies have grown to, with substantial market power. It gets to a point where, because they are platform companies, they have SMEs operating on top of this platform. And because of the very strong bargaining power, I think that the smaller guys are getting squeezed. So, keep in mind that the SMEs contributed to 60% of GDP and 70% of employment. So they are a substantial part of the economy. So if the system is not doing well because they're losing money due to the lack of bargaining power with the platform companies, then things has to change.
We know with a lot of complicated factors, the global supply chain, value chain, the changes of them have been exacerbated. Now, what would that mean if we see more new changes that maybe these companies might not necessarily be able to comply because of circumstances? What would that mean, in the mid and long term about the global supply chain, global value chain?
I realize that a lot of the commentators are indicating that these tensions are here to stay, but I can assure you that in the next 4 years, we will see more of an attempt for both countries to learn to work with each other, because when you have the two largest economies in conflict, neither of those economies wins. And I think the United States will understand that over the next 4 years, and certainly China has understood that for many, many years. So I think it's it has a negative impact on both countries and certainly the global economy. And I think we'll make some positive progress over the next 4 years. I'm very confident.
Interesting. Mr. Hong, are you as confident as Anthony?
Wow, I think anyone is better than Trump, to be honest. I think, even there are rivalries between the two countries, there are better ways to resolve the conflicts and differences between the countries. So I think Biden had a good track record as a vice president back then with Obama. I think, from a number of appointees that, he nominated and appointed for his economic team, and also for many posts that he will have in his government, one can see that, he's actually having a sort of a more reconciliatory and multilateral approach to problem solving. So I think, the whole world is looking forward to the Biden presidency from here.
Mr. Zhao?
Well, I think it depends on who are asking and where you stand. And the globalization in recent years created winners and losers globally, particularly in the United States. The Trumpism or Trump phenomenon is the product of such division created by globalization. So I think the current measures taken by the Trump administration against China is supported by a large population in the United States. It has a reason, has a base. So even Biden is in the White House, he cannot just reverse all those measures because he has only half of the country behind him. Even those people may not be happy to change that China policy very quickly. So I think this division will continue. And of course, it's going to be harmful to globalization and global economy. However, as I said, in that even if you have a higher level of global output, it's now the biggest problem is about the distribution and who gets what.
Yeah.
So I think this is a persistent problem.
Another question related to the latest development is, what is going to be the competition like? Now, both sides, China and the U.S., have been trying to, together, hopefully, set a new stage for discussion, debates, hopefully not conflicts, when the next president coming into the office. But, what kinds of competition will exist between the two countries? Will that be mainly about the economic clout? Or would that be competition about the rules, regulations, standards, which the latest development regarding these high-tech companies listed in the U.S. will be an interesting part of it. What will be the nature of it? How is this related to the latest development that we have seen?
We've seen competition in many fields. Just now we discussed, in technology, in financial market, and also, extended to politics, ideologies as well. So I think there are many layers to it, and I think Dr. Zhao just now mentioned that, there are actually a very large base in the U.S. that is supporting Trump, which is quite true. And also, even with Biden winning the presidency, they haven't win the Senate, and therefore, passing legislatures, to put Biden's ideas into action is quite difficult. or it will be very difficult to get bipartisan support to Biden's ideas. So given that, it's a little difficult to say, so early in the stage what kind of competition that we're facing.
Yeah.
But then all we can be sure is that the rivalry between the two countries is on.
One of the most crucial issues about business ties between China and the United States is what's going to happen to the first first round of trade deal, and whether there will be a second when the new administration comes into power. What do you think? How do you see the step-by-step latest move by the U.S. side towards Chinese companies? This is one of those examples. Have any indication about what's to happen? Mr. Chen.
Yes, I really believe that there will be an attempt to meet each other halfway with regard to trade. I believe that this administration has a greater interest in multilateral trade agreements rather than bilateral, which was the preferred vehicle under the current administration. And yes, there will be conflict, but if you look at the track record of President-elect Biden over his 40-plus years in government, he has always had a reputation for sitting down and compromising and making deals, and certainly a reputation that is much stronger than the current president with regard to these deals. Of course there's going to be conflict, of course there's going to be rivalry, but I think it'll be much more constructive over the next 4 years than it's been over the prior 4 years.
Mr. Zhao, final words.
Well, I think multilateral approach would definitely be taken by the Biden administration, but still, I think bilateral negotiation will still be the top priority in terms of trade and economic issues. So I think at this point, it's very important for both sides to have capable economic teams to lead and to negotiate in good faith.
A lot of interesting developments, certainly, as we witness over the past 4 years, and I'm sure more to come. Thank you so much for your insights, Anthony Chen, Hong Hao, Zhao Hai. Really appreciate it. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come. Up close with Emmanuelle Charpentier, the 2020 Nobel Laureate in chemistry, credited for laying the foundation of groundbreaking gene editing. Her thoughts on COVID-19 and breaking the glass ceiling as a top female scientist. Right after this break. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. French scientist Emmanuelle Charpentier won this year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry, along with her American colleague Jennifer Doudna, for developing a revolutionary method of altering DNA. Their tool is called CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing system. It has, for the very first time, enabled scientists to make precise changes in the long DNA stretches that make up the code of life for many organisms, including people. The method has been used to transform agriculture, to aid in new cancer therapies, and to help cure inherited diseases. Charpentier and also Doudna also made history as the first ever pair of women to receive the Nobel Prize for chemistry together. Recently, I had the chance to talk to Ms. Charpentier, who is the founding scientific and managing director of the Max Planck Unit for the Science of Pathogens in Berlin. Among many things, we talked about the path that led to her Nobel Prize-winning career, the COVID-19 pandemic, and what it is like to be a woman in her field. And she also shares with me some tricks about how to manage time. Let's listen in. Emmanuelle, what a pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. I want to ask you whether you want to be introduced as a Nobel Laureate for 2020 or the female Nobel Laureate for 2020. Which would you prefer?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Maybe the female Nobel Laureate, indeed.
Why?
Because actually not a lot of female scientists have been awarded the Nobel Prize so far, and this year the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to 2 female scientists. So I think it's worth to mention.
But it's also worth to mention what you have been doing in your field. Tell me more about your research. How did you start in that direction?
Oh, my line of research has always focused on the understanding of bacterial diseases, how bacteria cause diseases in humans, and focusing on really the molecular mechanisms they use to survive in the environment. And within this line of research, I got interested in a class of molecules that are called RNA. So maybe the people are familiar with RNA because of the mRNA vaccines that are mentioned in the media against SARS-CoV-2. So I have always been interested in different types of molecules, including RNA, and this led me actually to a mechanism that allows to understand how bacteria defend themselves against viruses. And this has led to an immune system existing in bacteria that is called CRISPR-Cas. And the deep study of this mechanism has led to this transformative technology that allows to recode the life, and that allows to edit and engineer genes in cells and organisms. So it has a transformative role in life sciences, biotechnology, and biomedicine.
Being someone in the field, what do you make of the current pandemic we're experiencing right now, arguably one of the worst 100 years at least?
Yeah, I think it's a lesson at least that shows us that it is very critical to really, let's say, put a lot of emphasis on basic research. And it's also, I think, a wake-up call with regard to really the urgent need to continue to do research in infectious diseases, even increase the budget for infectious diseases. I mean, this is a field of research that is not that fashionable for young scientists who tend to turn more to human genetics or brain diseases or cancer diseases. And we start to lose a little bit the expertise in really pure microbiology, bacteriology, and virology. And I think it is essential, because the story of SARS-CoV-2 also allows us to understand that, you know, you have an evolution of the microbes from their ability to not be virulent to their ability to cause diseases in animals, and then an evolution that allows them to cause diseases in humans. And this is really critical to maintain this research.
Do you feel somewhat relieved, at least to a certain extent, that, you know, there are more and more people that would understand what you are exactly talking about, the importance of the field as we are experiencing pandemic?
Yeah, I think I'm glad to see that it allows as well the public and the politicians and other, you know, relevant bodies to really understand the critical point of basic research. Also understand that, you know, natural processes can rule our world, whether this will be climate change or this will be a tiny virus changing our lives. And also, I believe it's also a reflection with regard to the fact that people underestimate to which extent the last 50 years have witnessed large developments in medicine. And I think everyone was thinking that, yeah, one can live, you know, nicely, because in any case there are vaccines. But I think this virus reminds everyone that evolution is evolution, and that it's important to carry on to maintain expertise in various fields of life sciences and biomedicine to be able to cope with challenges that may may sound unexpected.
Having said that, though, you know, Emmanuelle, there's a lot of debate about the virus and stuff like that. We don't want to go into details, but as a scientist, how do you see this debate? First of all, we have seen more discoveries of the virus existing in blood samples, for example, long before, or at least a few weeks before, the all-known reported date of the virus when it was found in China. The U.S. has been reporting about that, of the American cases and European countries, and also. How do you see, you know, the trickiness of virus, and whether we will eventually at all be able to trace back about what exactly happened from animal to human being, how that jump was done?
I believe that epidemiological studies are very important in that case.
Yes.
And for example, if you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, I think all over the world, the authorities have been overwhelmed by the number of cases, and have not always followed very, you know, intensively the epidemiology of the virus,
right.
Also taking into account the, you know, the data of the patients and trying to understand, you know, the evolution of diseases, why some patients, you know, are more affected than others. You know, is it due to a genetic background? So there are some studies in this regard, but and I believe that this would help as well. Now, it's always, you know, it's always difficult to trace back, because it's about also digging into the nature, and the thing is that, you know, that's the point. You deal with evolution of viruses. So if now you look at something, it could be that it has already evolved in the host you look at in nature. So that's why I think it just tells us that it's important to really emphasize this type of research, that is to observe the microbial world, observe its evolution, and being able to track it and to record it properly. Yeah. And this would allow in the future, when there is a future pandemic, to have more data to look at and trying to understand where it comes from.
Another question related to this is about the vaccine. Since you've been doing a lot of research in the field, you know, RNA vaccines together with others, how do you see the qualities of vaccine being researched within a year? Will that be the solution for us in terms of dealing with the COVID-19?
Let's say the vaccine is a huge step, surely. Now, you know, the future will tell us how long the immunity with this vaccine lasts. Yeah. The future will tell us whether, you know, whether the virus will evolve, nevertheless, you know, based on the implementation of the vaccine, will react by you know, evolving. So the future will tell us, and I guess, you know, it's always a challenge of how to vaccinate, you know, the population of the world. So I think we will have to live for a number of months whereby there will still be the requirement to wear masks. This, I guess, we cannot, you know, go around it.
As you earlier mentioned, that there were some losing of great talents in the field. How would you still be able to keep the spirit? You know, your field is not the dearest baby that, you know, the world is looking at today.
It is true that for me to continue to really be able to perform basic research in the field of microbiology and infectious diseases, I had to go through mobility, in the sense that, you know, I made my career by taking opportunities of offers at, you know, other institutions that would offer me better conditions at a time where, you know, where I was, the conditions were maybe not optimal with my regard. So it's a lot of persistence with regard to, to trying to find ways to continue the research. Also the recruitment, which is not always easy to recruit junior scientists. It is also very rewarding. I mean, for sure, in my case, I was awarded the Nobel Prize, but even without prizes, I think it's you know, it's a very specific it's very specific to be scientist nowadays. It's a lot of internationality, working with people. It's very enjoyable.
What was it like for scientists and a female scientist like you to survive and thrive despite of all of that?
I remember I have had 4 mentors during my PhD and postdoc time, 2 male scientists and 2 female scientists, and my female mentors always told me that, you know, I would have to be ready in the future to be transparent and to deal with a situation that you know, people will see me when maybe they need me, but otherwise they will not, you know, they will not see the female scientists around, and the decisions will be made, you know, behind the doors, not specifically involving everyone. So this is something that I've experienced. But also with regard to my perseverance, I can recall my experience in Vienna before I moved to Sweden. This was at the time where I started my research on CRISPR, actually. And I could not see really a future that would allow me to grow in Vienna. So I decided to apply to other places, and I found Umeå as the best place where I could do the research that I wanted to do at the time. And I remember that I really went to Umeå, and I was not that young at that time. I was nearly 40 years old. And in addition, I was going for not a stable position, but a 5-year contract, which was maybe not something that a lot of my colleagues would have expected at that time. And actually, it's true that I gave myself two possibilities, the one to succeed or the one to maybe not succeed. But if I was succeeding, it would have to be a good success. And I guess my research evolved very well when I moved to Sweden, because this is the research that got awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry of this year. So, so it's good to be perseverant.
But of course, you didn't know at that time you would win one prize after another. It's not the only prize you won. You also won many other prizes, including for you know, women scientists, like the Laureate Prize for women scientists around the world. But having said that, though, you know, there's always the issue. People would ask women about so-called work and life balance. As a scientist, particularly doing basic research, you know how much strenuous efforts you have to put, how much time, how much energy, how much devotion you have to put it out there. How do you see that question people always ask the women?
Yes, I mean, you know, this question, you know, applies for female and male scientists as well, because I have a lot of male colleagues who are, you know, let's say 35, 40 years old, who start their team, and they have kids, and it's also an issue for them. I think what saves me as well is to be extremely organized, and also because I moved quite a bit around. I learned to be very efficient and to grasp fast you know, what I have to do, to try to simplify processes, actually. I often, you know, people try to make things more complex than they are, and I always try to simplify them. Simplification does not mean, you know, a lack of sophistication. I always refer to the CRISPR-Cas system. That is the reason why I was awarded the prize. And it's a system existing in nature that is very simple in the principle, yet sophisticated. You know, I think it's important to try, and this is what I learned over time, actually, to try to see the essential of an issue when an issue comes to you.
Tell me more about which fields are you looking at when it comes to science in China?
I think actually your country is actually doing quite well in the field of infectious diseases, and I think at least understanding that it's important to maintain this field of research, and I hope that it will continue, because this is a field of research that is, you know, needs support. I believe maybe it will wake up also, you know, some interest in this field of research for young kids in, you know, in your country.
Absolutely.
Which I will be happy about. Because, you know, the more kids in the world, you know, will develop an interest in science, the better the future world will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go, final question. How to be both a very efficient and devoted scientist, while at the same time be able to maintain, as we always want to, the beauty both from outside and also from within?
Let's put it that way. Obviously, I am who I am. But I think it's
what you just said. I am who I am. And that's a beauty in itself already, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But I try to keep an integrity in what I'm doing. And also, this is a question of respect for either what I do or with the people I interact with. So I think I value quite highly respect, dignity, and integrity.
All right. Well, the effective, very efficient Emmanuelle that I meet today. Thank you so much, Emmanuelle Charpentier, Nobel Laureate in Chemistry for the year 2020. What a pleasure. I'm looking forward, Emmanuelle, for your coming to China. Certainly a very exciting woman and absolutely insightful scientist. Emmanuelle Charpentier. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insights CGTN, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team. Thanks for watching and